Okay, so this is my Math Methods 2 notebook portfolio. I have all the lessons that we kind of did in the field experience right here. Quite a bit of Eureka lessons. And then, of course, we have the Nebraska College and Career Standards, number, algebra, geometry, data, the little color sheet that we were handed. I have a little artifact here we'll talk about later. I have the first standard, all the notes from the weeks, standard 2, algebra, standard 3, geometry, all the notes and activities, standard 4, data, again all the activities, differentiation section, some activities and notes, the assessment and planning strategy section, again with notes, activities. Then we have the field placement experience section, which I also have an artifact in there. Then I have some feedback from peers and just some notes I took. So that is my portfolio. And so I just checked off the organization section, and here are the standards with the Nebraska state standards right there. And so it says, describe how understanding the organization for the state standards indicates may impact your future teaching. Well, I think it would definitely impact my teaching because you have to know each standard, the numbers, the algebra, the geometry, the data, how to teach it to the best of your ability, and that's what we kind of learned during this whole class in our field experience. You know, we just kind of got some experience kind of working with each standard and the importance of each one, especially on testing and stuff like that. So that's how I would describe the importance of my future teaching for that one. And so it says spot check number 1. So here's the first one right here. It was from week number 2, chapter 11, building strategies for whole number computation. And pretty much here are my notes right here. Flexible methods, 3 types of computational strategies, direct modeling, student invented strategies, standard algorithm. We kind of learned about this in both Math 230 and 330 as well. And you know, using the strategies that work for each student is very important. There's not one strategy that works the best. People learn differently, and therefore they can use different strategies. And so the corresponding activity that actually went with this one was activity 12.12. It's called box math. And as you see right here, it shows this. So my reflection is on the back. And I said, this activity is very cool and interactive. I would use this in small group time. The students have a set of numbers and are given an equation with a addition or subtraction sign, and they're also given the answer. And they have to rearrange the numbers to make the equation true. Here's an example I wrote right here. So the cards they're given are, let's say, 3, 5, and 8, and then they're given these 2 are blank, and then it equals 8. And so they have to know to put 3 and 5 in here to equal 8 to make the equation true. So I just thought that was a cool little activity. Yeah, pretty much. And then the next spot check I wanted to talk about was right here on week 8. This is probably my favorite chapter. It was chapter 16, 17, developing geometric reasoning and concepts. And so here are my notes. Shapes can be described in terms of their location. 3-dimensional shapes can be seen from different viewpoints, which help us understand relationships between 2 and 3-dimensional figures. And also the mental change and position and size shapes as well. And right here, I kind of wrote down the geometry goals for students, and they're all listed right here. All pretty important. And I put a star down here as well. Manipulatives help students get in touch with geometry. It's a little pun there. And it's very beneficial to them. That is actually proven through research. And then the corresponding activity with this one was called Tricky Shapes. And I wrote on the back a little reflection and how I would use it. This activity called Tricky Shapes is a great one for lower elementary. You give the students 2 shapes that are close to the same or the same as the target shape they're also given. And students must talk about its characteristics and why it is exactly like the target shape or why it isn't. So I just kind of drew some examples. So the target shape they're given is a triangle, and this one is an isosceles triangle, and this one isn't even a triangle because it has a little extra part right there. And then this one is actually a four-sided polygon, and this one is also an isosceles triangle. So the students have to kind of talk about the characteristics of the triangle and then kind of relate it back. And so I thought that was really, really cool as well. Let's see here. So I just got done with spot check number 1 and number 2 with the notes and the eText access activity with the reflection. So now let's move into the content section where I have to show an artifact and describe its importance. So here is my artifact. It's actually the first thing I actually wrote, my very first visit. And I put this in here because Mr. Wickman, my cooperating teacher, actually told me a couple things, and I really kind of took a lot away from that. And he kind of talked about how different things cover standards. So even if it's not in the curriculum, it may not need to be in the entire lesson, but Mr. Wickman said that even if it's not in like the curriculum or a Eureka lesson, you need to also teach to the students. So I thought that was kind of cool. So I kind of put that artifact in the content section. And then it says content theory. And so it's a little question. Rank the following 4 areas in order of importance: planning, methods, discipline, and evaluation. I would say the most important one of those is planning, because if you're not organized, then your lessons just aren't going to flow well. And so it's very important to, planning is probably my number 1. My number 2 would be methods, because you have to have good methods in math. You need to be organized, and you need to know what you're teaching to the students. My next one would be probably evaluation, because if you're good at evaluating your students, you know their needs, and that is super important in growing students in and out of the classroom. And the last one is discipline. I think I, as a teacher, have a good sense of knowing how to control the classroom, so I think my classroom management is pretty good, so I'm not too worried about that one. So those would be my rankings on planning, methods, discipline, and evaluation. They're all important, but planning is definitely my number 1. And then the next thing is the field section. It says show an artifact. And so I actually kept Mr. Wickman. Here is the field placement experience. And I actually kept an artifact from Mr. Wickman. It was his evaluation of one of the Eureka lessons that I taught. And I kept this because I think it's very, very important to reflect on the feedback you're given. And so Mr. Wickman, he gave me a lot of good feedback, and I reflected on it, and it's good just to keep this and keep looking back and knowing that you can work on things and keep becoming a better teacher. So that's why I put that in there. And then the next thing is the field experience differentiation question, and it says give an example of how you used differentiation in a lesson and or in the classroom. So I would say this actually occurred when I taught my storybook lesson, and mine was about mine and Hannah's was actually about the same thing. It was about the coordinate plane and the x and y axis, and where my differentiation comes in is when I gave the students some problems and I gave them some coordinates to plot on a coordinate plane graph, and a couple of the students got done so quick that I actually had to make up some new points that were a little more challenging just off the top of my head, so they had something to do. So it wasn't necessarily students struggling, it was them exceeding. And so that's when I had to use differentiation kind of at the top of my head. And so I think that it's very important to know kind of when to use it, and you have to kind of gauge the students and how they're responding to the lesson to know when to use it and when not to use it. Because as we talked about in class and in our field experience, productive struggle is kind of the new word that's going around, and it's actually beneficial for the students to have that productive struggle. But it's also important to know when they're truly struggling, and we have to step in and kind of differentiate the lesson or the lesson plans or the problems as well. So the next thing is field experience planning question. So it says, give an example of when you planned, but things did not go as planned. As the teacher, how did you handle it? So this actually occurred on my last visit. Hannah and I split up a Eureka lesson, and we were going through the fluency part, and my lesson was kind of dealing with shapes, and I thought I planned well for it, but I didn't plan as well as I thought because the students were kind of all over the place, and my classroom management was not as well. Not as well as I wish it could have been, and I kind of talked to Mr. Wickman about that afterwards. But as a teacher, you just have to go with the flow, and you have to kind of gauge the students, and if things aren't going well, you got to try something else. And so that's kind of what I did. So instead of doing exactly what I did, I kind of took Mr. Wickman's advice, and I put a flow chart on the board that talked about quadrilaterals, parallelograms, squares, rhombus, and trapezoids. And it gave the students a kind of a visual, and so they kind of stopped talking a little bit and actually kind of filled it in on their paper. And so that's what I think is super duper important when it comes to planning, and you don't get it right the first time. That's what we also talk about in our classes at UNK. Failure leads to success. And so I think it's very important to keep that in the back of your mind. Just because something didn't go well doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. You just have to, come at it from a different angle. And the last thing on here is the reflection. So it says, explain how you intend to use your math notebook in the future. So this math book is a very good resource, I think, because it has all the 4 standards, and it has all of my notes and all of my little tiny activities that I can pull out if I need to at some point in my teaching career. And so I think that having this in the classroom, and also some of the Eureka lessons that I taught and have under my belt now, and also the notes, the activities, the reflection that I have in the field placement, and just kind of all the different differentiating strategies and different assessments that I can do in and out of the classroom are truly beneficial to me, and I think it will really help my teaching career, especially the first year, because I know they say first year teachers, kind of struggle with classroom management, and having these materials, I think will better set me up for success in the classroom, and also kind of relieve a little stress maybe, because I think there's a study out there that said that math is one of the least favorite things that teachers like to teach, but I don't think that's true. I love teaching math, and I'm very excited that I had the opportunity to make this Math Methods 2 notebook portfolio, and also had great experience in the classroom at Windy Hills with Mr. Wickman, with my 12 field experiences, and I truly think that I learned a lot from all this, taking the class online and doing the field experiences, and it has truly been an awesome experience, and I'm very excited for the future to come, getting my own classroom and teaching students all about mathematics. Thank you.